Okay, let's see. Hey, everybody. Once again, this is Shakim. I'm in our cat. Man, I am with a wonderful individual, Jordan, man. He is running for South Carolina House District 117. So
That's right.
you're going to get to know him. We're going to talk about some good current events. We want to talk about conservatism, values, and how it relates to everything that's going on. So, man, y'all welcome Jordan. Jordan Pace, running for House District 117. So, Jordan,
Thanks for having me.
yes, sir. How you doing, Jordan?
Pretty good. I think the hail just started outside.
Yeah.
Storm came up out of nowhere.
Right, it did.
Pretty good.
Right.
Yourself?
Yes, sir. Man, I'm doing good, doing good. So I want to start off. I was just reading an article in the Post and Courier, and it just talked about the coronavirus cases. So and the first time, ever, they said we have over a thousand cases. I think it was like 1,081, somewhere around there. I was kind of reading it a little while ago. What's your take? Do you feel that the federal and state government is doing the best that they can? How do you feel, especially because you're running to be in the House of Representatives? How do you feel that our government is doing with handling the coronavirus issue?
So I think my general philosophy on anything government related is that individuals, families, and communities make better decisions than government bureaucracies. Whatever the situation is, I think that is the principle that the founders set out. I think that's the biblical principle to live by. So in regards to pandemics, to this pandemic, to COVID-19 specifically, every time the media puts out these giant numbers, we got to think about incentive. Like, what's the media's incentive with putting this out? They want clicks. I mean, the Post and Courier makes more money from their website than their paper distribution now. So they want clicks. It's clickbait, just like all these terrible websites you see at the bottom of whatever website you're on, Facebook ads, all this stuff. So when they throw out there like 1,081 COVID infections with no context, what they're not telling you is, oh, by the way, most of these people aren't showing any symptoms. If you're below 60 years old, statistically, according to the CDC, their best estimates, you have a 99.995% chance of survivability. It is more dangerous for me to get in my car and drive to the bank 5 miles away. Like I have a higher likelihood of dying in a car wreck doing that than I do as someone under 60 without preconditions of dying of COVID-19. So that they're putting things out there without the context, because that's what our media unfortunately has gotten down to is sensationalism, clicks, not context, and not actually giving people the truth. So has the government's reaction? I think the government's reaction for the last month has been a lot better as information has come in, and we've sit and the CDC has said this is not the Black Death. This isn't the plague. This isn't if you have asthma, if you have these lists of preconditions, stay home as much as you can, wear a mask, do it, stay safe. But otherwise, it's very, very unlikely. I have a higher chance of getting struck by lightning playing golf. I don't play golf about once a year. So,
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So with that in mind, when the governor, my criticisms for what little there is, I guess, for the governor was I would have much rather him follow the law. The law says that emergency declarations can last for 15 days by by executive order, and then they have to be ratified by the legislature. And that didn't happen. Instead, he just kept issuing new executive orders saying the same thing, and that's a fundamental skirting of the law. We as a people are founded as a nation of laws. The Constitution is the highest authority. In South Carolina, the state constitution is the highest authority, and Trump executive orders for sure. So there was a conflict there. I wish he'd have just called the session, called the folks back in the session, give a yes or no. I think they were capable of doing that, but he decided not to. So that would be my biggest criticism.
Right. So basically, it's the people. The people need to be able to ones who make the decisions. So if there's any way, if you don't like it, stay away from it. If you want to wear the mask, protect yourself. But ultimately, the government shouldn't have that much authority to manage our day-to-day lives in these particular scenarios.
No, absolutely not. My friend Anna, she lives over in Mount Pleasant. She grew up in the Soviet Union. She's an older lady, I guess by that standard, wise lady, right? And her father wasn't part of the party, right? The Communist Party. He was a brilliant scientist. He got persecuted all the time. She had to see firsthand what it's like when the government runs every part of your life. Right. And unfortunately, I teach high school, right? Unfortunately, a lot of teenagers and in the 20s millennial, our generation, don't know history. Even the history that was happening as we were being born and the Soviet Union fell apart. The misery, the human misery and death that that government, that totalitarian communist socialist government brought is insane. And we have people here, over in the left coast in Washington State declaring, with it CHOP, they're calling it now, like Capitol Hill occupied whatever, the socialist utopia where people are getting mugged at night. And, I mean, that's a small scale of what was happening all over the world when the Soviet Union, those kind of socialist revolutions from 1848 on. So I don't want to see anything approaching that. That's why I got started getting into politics, because I was thinking for my future kids, grandkids, unless somebody stands up and says, here's the standard of this Constitution, here's the biblical standards for how we should behave with one another, here's what government's supposed to do, here's what families are supposed to do. There's circles of responsibility that shouldn't cross, and there's consequences when they do. So particularly in this case of the COVID, it's families, responsibility, parents, kids. You make the decision. If you want to go out to eat, if you're not comfortable, stay home, order in, make your own food, save some money. I teach Dave Ramsey, so saving money is a good thing. We saw what happened when this pandemic kicked off. Everything started shutting down. The average American had like $700 in savings. That's on average. That's billionaires and everybody else included. So most households don't have anything in savings because we press everything to the limit. I think we hopefully folks have learned the government's not going to be able to take care of you forever. Eventually, the money's going to run out. Prepare for incidences like this as best you can. And when stuff like this happens, the really cool thing that I've seen is churches and organizations like Lewis Smith's organization, community, which I know you're involved in, right?
Yes, sir.
That was handing out food to people who need it. It's not a government-driven thing. That's volunteers showing up to help their community, and that's where we need to look to for help and assistance in those situations rather than government.
Okay. So one of the issues that has been really big has been prison reform. Trump with the first step back, and we had a lot of dialogue about prison reform and how it should look. There's a big issue right now going on in South Carolina about medical marijuana being legalized. So let's kind of talk about that first. Do you think that medical marijuana, there's a place for us to legalize medical marijuana for medicinal purposes?
Clearly, I think it was actually this week or next week. There's a medical marijuana conference down at MUSC. There's very clearly scientific research that backs up that there are medical qualities to it. But like a lot of things, the government's the details on how it's handled. I think Tom Davis's bill, Senator Tom Davis from Beaufort, his bill that he brought in the last session was very good as a first step in that, because it was very restrained. It was probably the most conservative, restrained medical marijuana bill that I've ever seen in any state. I think that was a good step. I'm a little rusty on the statistics, but I know it's a huge proportion of people who are incarcerated in South Carolina are for first-time drug offenses, and not all that's marijuana. And not most of the time, at least in the conversations I've had with law enforcement, somebody's got a bud on them or some tiny amount. They might write them a ticket, make them throw it away. but even still, just having that hanging over, the Damocles sword there, having that gone would be helpful. In regards to prison reform, I know North Carolina, I don't know if the governor signed it yet, but both the houses passed kind of their state version of the First Step Act earlier this week. I haven't looked into the details of that, but operating the same principle from the federal legislation to the South Carolina version, I think would be a good idea. I like Nancy Mace's bill that got passed and signed about shackling pregnant prisoners.
Right.
Doing away with that. That was a great step. I'm glad she passed that.
Right.
So some work to be done.
Right. So somebody in the comments asked, are you okay with a small amount of recreational marijuana, or how did you? So we know on the medical side you're okay with that. So somebody asked about the recreational part of it.
Yeah. So the term that I like better than legalizing is decriminalizing. So legalizing as far as medical stuff, yes, because you have to have it enshrined in law for it to be prescribed and bought legally. As far as on that side of things, I think decriminalization would be the better path to go forward. I think Portugal kind of led the way with that about 20 years ago, and they've seen a massive decrease in crime in general. But decriminalizing, as in writing a ticket for small amounts rather than going to jail, I think the trickle down effect of that would be fantastic. Particularly minority communities, where was it like 1 in 10? I think 1 in 10 African Americans under the age of 40 get incarcerated before they're 40, and most of that's from drug offenses. So, if we can do anything to help solve the issue with fatherlessness, and that applies in white communities too, it's just more pronounced, I guess, on the minority side. But anything that helps with the problem of fatherlessness, if you're 1 in 10 is in jail, that means 1 in 10 or more kids don't have a dad who's home making money and taking care of them. Setting an example, that's definitely something to look at.
Okay. Oh, that's cool. So so when you start talking about well, let's look at the all of the situation, the current events that's going on right now. I mean, the country is like in an uproar. You had the Ahmaud Arbery case where you saw the citizens arrest. Actually, now it's like totally being scrutinized. Some of the members of the House, I think Justin Bamberg and Marvin Pendarvis, they were talking about redoing or somehow adjusting the citizens arrest thing, the citizens arrest law. Do you think it's time to review the citizens arrest law in the books? And would you what's your take on South Carolina and its quest to end the citizens arrest law?
Well, there's a tension there, right? So if you look at, I'm not an expert on this particular law. I mean, I'm not an attorney.
Right.
I'm a teacher and a real estate agent,
right.
But my understanding of most citizens arrest laws go way back, way back in English common law to like 800s AD, where, again, originally, and even up until early 1900s in South Carolina, you'd have a sheriff, maybe a handful of deputies, and if a situation you hit the sheriff, to arrest multiple people or some sort of law enforcement situation, he would deputize or call up a posse, which has a lot of negative connotations now for good reason in the South after stuff that happened in the 1900s. But again, in theory, he would call up, and that was kind of the origin of the citizens arrest. There was not widespread police force. You didn't have 100 sheriff's deputies or so in Berkeley County, or more than that in Charleston County. A handful of deputies, and citizens would show up with pitchforks or whatever to arrest whoever needed to be arrested. So that was the origin of it. Do we need that today? That's definitely worth looking at. But the tension there is, on the other, you have the same people who are saying that also saying we need to defund the police. I feel like you got to pick one. We're either going to have a police force, or we're going to have kind of that militia mindset of citizens arrest, where there's a very small police force and the citizens come and do it. I would much rather have a well-trained police force. And I heard podcaster actually earlier today talking about this, a guy who's got a background in law enforcement, military, and his suggestion was have dramatically increased training times for police officers. So rather than a few weeks, a few months at the academy, a little bit here and there, have it 10 to 20% of their work week be training, whether it's physical training or classroom training, constitutional law, military deployments. I don't know how familiar you are with this, but usually before a unit gets deployed for 6 months to a year, they train for 18 months before going on that. So they train longer than they deploy, than they're on mission. And that's kind of the standard, ideally the standard that they have in the military, which there's some issues with militarization of police for sure. And that mindset, my friend Ray Nash, he's a sheriff of Dorchester County for several years. What he does today is he teaches constitutional community-based policing to departments. He was up at NYC, NYPD last year, teaching their rookies, hundreds of them coming in. Goes all around the country doing this. But as far as, I think a military-based mentality of training periods would be a smart idea. More training ideally would lead to less incidences, whether that wouldn't affect several of those that you mentioned. The Ahmaud Arbery, that was very clearly an issue that should have been taken care of, that should not have required an outcry for justice there. If we're taking a 10,000-foot view, the danger of thinking of America as one homogenous unit. We're not France. France is like a singular democratic republic. The United States, in theory, at least it used to be, was a bunch of states with different cultures and mentalities. And probably you and I have a lot more in common, despite looking very different, than I would have with some white guy from Oregon,
right?
Or Minneapolis for that. So the media again is conflating a lot of these issues, because what happened, in Georgia with Ahmaud Arbery was very, very different from what happened. I don't know, pick any of them from anywhere around the country. I mean, it's a continent-wide republic with different issues at different localities. This is whenever I see calls for the federal government to fix local issues, it's disturbing to me. It's like trying to build a porch with a sledgehammer. Yeah, you can probably build the porch with a sledgehammer as your only tool. In theory, it's going to look ugly. It's going to be, full of splinters. You're going to have a hard time driving those little nails without breaking a lot of things. Because that's what the federal government is. It's a big sledgehammer. It's meant to do big things like foreign diplomacy, interstate trade, big things, not surgery, not fixing small community issues. That's what our job is on the community level. And that's why I don't want to mess with federal politics. South Carolina has a bunch of issues needed fixing. We don't need the federal government to come in and try to do that. They tried that once after the war in 1865, the Reconstruction period, which was not great for anyone anywhere around the South. So I would much rather see communities handle this locally, because we have great local leaders. I saw you were interviewing Reggie Burris.
Yeah.
Was that yesterday?
Yeah, that was yesterday.
Yeah. I saw it pop up. Like, we got guys like that who can have a really clear vision on how to do things right here locally, that I would much rather rely on than some, again, bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. trying to tell us how to fix things based on what happened in Minneapolis or based on something that happened in Seattle, where the culture is just very, very, very different.
Right. Okay. So, question. So with so as talking to Reggie Burgess last night, we were talking about citizens review boards and transparencies. So, the city of Charleston, they've had a racial bias audit, and the city of North Charleston is up for one. How do you think each, or would you be opposed to each local municipality having like a citizens review board, or some way that the citizens will be able to understand police practices and be able to hold, not only law enforcement officers accountable, but be able to give kudos when, officer does good in the community. What's your take on community police relations boards?
Yeah, if again, this is very much a central or a decentralization idea. As a state legislator, potentially, I don't think Columbia should come in and tell the city of North Charleston, the city of Charleston, how they should handle that. Beyond saying, these are the minimum standards of state law, state constitution. You need to protect people's rights. As far as how they want to do that, if they want to use citizen review boards, that's fine. Whether it's city of Charleston, North Charleston, Berkeley County, Charleston County, whoever, whatever tools they want to use, as long as they're not infringing on the rights of citizens, I don't see a problem with that. And I don't see whether the legislature should get involved with it, because it's like, community up is what I prefer to see solutions.
Okay, community up. So there's a question. AJ said, also South Carolina is involved in local issues and still doesn't get it right. So how does Mr. Pace propose to address local issues?
Yeah, that's a little broad.
Yeah. I want him to be, if you could be more specific, because he said, okay.
We do have a lot of local issues,
yeah,
that's for sure.
I'm not sure which one address. Okay, go ahead.
In principle, if it's the more local it is, I think the solution needs to be more local. So if the issue is with City of Charleston policing, that needs to be addressed on the city council level. If they're infringing, if they're breaking state law, let's get the state house involved, get the attorney general, whoever, on the state level involved with that. But again, my philosophy on this is more local, the better. If it's something in your neighborhood, if there's something going on in my neighborhood, we're going to get the HOA people together and figure out what the problem is. We're not going to, hopefully nobody's going to go to the mayor of Goose Creek and say, hey, this is happening in my neighborhood and I want you to go fix it. Hopefully he'd say, well, have you talked to your HOA about it? These people aren't painting their shutters the right color. Something simple as that. But if somebody's breaking the law, then you call the police. So there's an escalation there of things that I'm afraid we're missing, because whenever there's something bad that happens, whenever we have a local issue, that's not it's not the president of the United States' job to come in and do it. His responsibilities are foreign diplomacy, for the primarily foreign diplomacy, defense, those things. It's not to come in and fix local community issues, which is very odd to me when I see what the protests going on around, whether it's in Minneapolis or downtown Charleston or whatever, yelling about federal government, whoever it is, and at this point Trump, but whoever the president may be, that's not his job. Why aren't you yelling at the mayor,
right,
or the governor if it's a state issue? Like, we can't keep jumping to the federal government to solve our problems, because they're a big giant club, a big giant hammer.
Right.
They don't fix problems. They come in and smash things.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about, this is probably like one of your favorite issues, education.
Okay. Yeah.
Education. We know South Carolina has a very huge issue with education. We've seen, teachers, they're talking about, increasing pay. A lot of teachers are saying, hey, man, we want more teacher pay. And, if there's certain things you can't talk on because you're in the field, that's perfectly okay. But what are some of your suggestions on how can we, at the state level, make education better? I mean, because we have, a lot of, Charleston County has, as you know, a lot of failing schools. So how do we get it? Exactly. So how do we get in on a state level, make teachers happy, increase quality education, and kind of bridge that gap between, the achievement gap? Let's get into that and give us your thought on that.
So I like, in thinking about this, the first thing I did was try to figure out what doesn't work. We've been at this for 50 plus years, but as far as like a Department of Education on the state level, for 50 years, they've been trying to figure out how to make education better. And their general solution for, again, the past 50 years is concentrate more power in Columbia, in the State Department of Education, condense school districts into bigger and bigger school districts, and do more testing, like more standardized testing. So those three things for the last 50 years have not seemed to have done much good for any of us, is the conclusion I've come to. So I know the solution isn't more power in Columbia, it's not more testing, and it's not bigger school districts. So if we ruled those things out, we've spent the state spends a tremendous amount of money on education. It's the number one as far as non-obligatory spending, as far not PIBA, pension stuff, not things that the state is obligated by law to set a certain amount for. Other than that, as far as discretionary spending, it's the biggest thing as far as a line item. Charleston County spends almost $20,000 per student per year. Their school district budget is over $500 million with a B. Over $500 million, $500 million plus a year. It's not a money thing. Even in Berkeley County, you look, what's the name of that high school? There's a high school in northern Berkeley County, on the other side of the lake. It starts with a C, and I'm now forgotten.
Cane Bay.
No, it's not Cane Bay. It's the one over. It's small. It's a 1A school. There's more tablets. I'll think of it in a second. There's more tablets than students at that school. Yeah. Because Google gave them a bunch, then the federal government came in because they're Title I, meet certain qualifications, like here's some tablets for you. So they got more computers and tablets than they do kids. So it's not a technology issue. So what's the issue? And again, I've thought about this a lot, being in education. Going kind of back to my philosophy there, it's communities and families, particularly families, I believe, make better decisions as far as education than a bureaucrat does. So if a family says, I think my kid would be better educated in a certain environment, at a certain place, a certain school, I think they should have the freedom to do that. Obviously, the biggest obstruction there is finances. So what can the state do to alleviate that? Well, we've got a few programs in pilot mode. There's a special needs scholarship fund that's set up today. It's on a fairly small scale. I think it's like $25 million is what they've bumped it up to. So the way this works is companies and individuals can contribute to the scholarship fund. It's tax deductible up to a certain amount. It's a pretty large amount. And then a board that's selected by the state legislature, run through the Department of Revenue, distributes out by application. Like, so if a parent has a special ed kid who needs who would do better in a private school in their area, let's say they live in like Abbeville or Kershaw County, somewhere rural, the school district's not very well equipped to handle special needs kids, then if there's a private school, a parochial school, church school, something that's set up to do that, which I know we have one in Somerville. It's called Caris Academy. It's specifically for kids on the spectrum, so autistic kids. It's 100% private. It's what it's set up for. They operate totally on donations. But if somebody wanted to send their kid there, then had the money to pay the relatively small tuition to go there, then the scholarship fund could give them the money to do it. Now, again, this is on a small scale. It's limited. But there's talk about expanding that to go beyond special ed and to include families that are under a certain amount a year, bring in a certain amount of money a year. So include poverty to that list, expand it to dyslexia. I mean, there's a whole list of things that talk about expanding the program. So that would allow a lot more families to apply for those scholarships. So that would be one way of doing it. Again, that's kind of on a smaller scale. There's talk about, depending on how to do it, if you backpack the money that the state spends, which is about $7,000 per student, to the kid, if you attach it to the student, and the parent can send that student to whatever school, whether it's charter, private, whatever. Now, certainly there's some issues that come up with that. The ACLU doesn't like it because then they argue you're sending taxpayer money to a potential church school. We can hash that out. I think that's a discussion worth having.
Right.
Even on the teacher in a private school. So I don't even know if not all private schools would accept that, because that kind of brings up, is there strings attached? You have to teach certain things to get that money.
Right.
So there's definitely complications with it. What I know will make things better is less testing and less bureaucracy on the part of teachers. The teachers that most of the teachers at the school I teach at are certified. They taught in government schools before they came to the school I'm at. And I asked them when I got there, what brought you here? Certainly it wasn't money, because we make less money than government school teachers do by a long shot. It's not the benefits, it's not the money. Hold on one second. I think my wife's trying to get now. Yeah, she figured it out.
All right, cool.
What they told me was, almost universally, it wasn't a matter of money. It was a matter of dealing with the bureaucracy. Like they said, they just want to teach. They don't want to deal with all the other stuff that the government schools are forcing teachers to do, and they want an administration to back them up. If whether it's a discipline issue, or the kid says one thing and the parents get mad, they wanted an administration that's going to back them up when they're right, when they're in the right, rather than not. So that's why they came over to the private school side. And the school I teach, it's a private school, but it's incredibly diverse. It's one of the lowest cost private schools, kind of in the top tier level. I think it's $7,800 a year for the high school, which is a lot of money to a lot of people, to most of us. As a teacher, I know that. But it's significantly less than Porter Goud or First Baptist, tens of thousands of dollars a year. So we have a very diverse school population as far as ethnicity goes. And most of them came there not because, trying to get away from certain things, but because they want a smaller school environment. So as far as, and we don't have these giant tests at the end of the year that the teachers are teaching toward. We as teachers are allowed to teach toward the syllabus that we develop. We still have state standards to adhere to, but our college placement rate is significantly higher. Something like not more than 90%. Mm-hmm. And it's not because these kids are particularly smarter. It's because the families are involved with it. Same reason charter schools. Maurice Washington is, I've known him for a long time. He told me several years ago, when the Charleston Charleston Math and Science Academy got started in the government housing complex that he grew up in downtown Charleston, they had very little as far as equipment goes, space goes. But because the families were dedicated to getting their kids educated, with half the money that the most schools had coming in from the state, they started having amazing results. So again, back to the community-based thing. I think if we want to fix education, step one is cut the standardized testing and red tape bureaucracy coming from Columbia. We need to get Columbia much less involved in school district activities. They put stipulations and requirements in school districts that are oftentimes outrageous, that cost millions of dollars sometimes for the school districts to adhere to. Teachers want to teach. That's why they got into teaching. It's not an easy thing to get into, to get certified and all that. When you let the teachers teach, and as far as administration backing up the teachers, I don't know. I mean, that's a community-based thing that we can't rely on the government to fix behavior of kids. That's the family's responsibility. So on that side of things, we need families and communities to step in and step up and actually start instilling discipline in kids. It's not something that teachers are equipped to do in a classroom environment without a foundation there of discipline from the home. Teachers aren't going to be able to fix a kid in the classroom, especially when there's 20 to 30 of them at a time. So our expectations there need a shift.
Right. Okay. So if you get in, what would be one of the first things you work on? Your first, they always like to talk about your first 90 days or just whatever. Like what's the issue that you're passionate about that you say, listen, Jordan Pace, I'm going in Columbia and I'm gonna work and try to do this first. What's your first? Give us like some of your first, your biggest agenda, where your heart is.
Sure. Well, my initial, so as a freshman legislator, you don't have a whole lot of influence, right? Especially in the House. There's 127 members of the House come in with, a freshman class of 10 to 20, maybe if it's a big one. There's not a lot of clout there, right? My number one goal going in is to meet and have a civil discussion with every single member of the House. Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter to me. I want to meet them and get to know them a little bit, and have an element of civility there, whether we agree or disagree on everything or anything. If you ask where my heart's at, that would be step number one. Particularly on legislation, it's really awkward when I'm on the real estate side and I have a real estate hat on. When people move down here from like Massachusetts and I sell them a house and they're all excited because we got these low taxes in South Carolina, and I have the unfortunate task of telling them, well, our property taxes are lower a little bit, but we have the highest income tax in the South. I have some friends that I've met that were retired here from Texas that did not realize they'd moved here to be close to their grandkids. They didn't realize that Texas, which has a 0% income tax, moved here, and we have a 7% income tax if you make more than $15,000 a year, which is most of us. You're in the top tax bracket. That their retirement's just getting eaten up. 7% a year after year after year, on top of federal taxes. It's not competitive. So definitely something high on my list is reducing or ideally eliminating that income tax. The tax. Anytime the government taxes something, they're trying to get less of it. So when you put a tax on cigarettes, the explicit reason was we want people to smoke less. If you tax alcohol, we want people to drink alcohol less. So if you tax income, the same principle applies. Well, if you put a high tax on income, people are going to have less income. It disincentivizes work and making that income, and it hurts the poorest first, because as a portion of their income, it's more. So that's what I would like to see, make us a lot more competitive, especially with states. The states around us. North Carolina's is lower by about 2%. Same thing with Georgia. Florida's is 0%. We have our economy is not too dissimilar from Florida. High tourism, which is hurting us right now. But we have this really, really wonderful coastline. People are really starting to discover, the mountains up in Greenville. It's becoming a tourist spot. Nobody goes to Columbia, but we have these tourist places that are starting to pick up. The upstate, Columbia, even down here, we've seen a dramatic increase in making things, production. So I think, need to move out of this mindset of income taxes, because we don't need it. We've had it before this for the last 10 years. We've had a state surplus, like a budget surplus of tens of millions of dollars. Let's cut the income tax. Let's give people a break. So that would be high on my list. Transparency in government is another one. A lot of people don't realize this, but legislators, you're familiar with FOIA, Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir.
So every state has their own version of FOIA. The federal government has, their version of FOIA where you can request to see government documents, emails, whatever. Well, the state, when they passed their FOIA laws back 20, 30 years ago, the legislature exempted themselves from FOIA. So you can request to get to see the governor's emails, to see the Department of Education, the Superintendent of Education, whoever it is in the cabinet, on the cabinet level, down to the lowest level government employee, to the janitor of USC. If there's a state employee, you theoretically could FOIA them, but you can't ever FOIA a legislator's email. And this was tested when Nikki Haley was the first year she was elected as governor. Previously, she was in the House, and there was investigation going on about some potential things that happened, and there was a FOIA request to see her emails, and it was denied because she was a legislator. So there's that. To me, is crazy. When I worked for Congressman Sanford, we were well aware, part of the orientation from the congressional staff people is be careful what you say on email, because any citizen can ask to see it because you work for them. That's their right. Well, legislators work for us, and I think it's the people's right to see their official emails. If they're corresponding about whatever it is, they shouldn't get a special exemption over everybody else. So things like that, transparency laws, ethics laws, need a significant, hard look, and that would take time. I mean, that's not going to be a quick fix. That's just something I have to chip away at on the edges a little bit by little bit. But that's, Michelangelo made his statues a little bit at a time, not in big giant chunks. So I'm patient, and part of getting to know people is building up that capital.
Right. So what let's talk about affordable housing really quick, because in this, in the city of Charleston, North Charleston, it seems like, and this from living in the area, every time you turn around, it's the prices of houses or rent is just skyrocketing. The city of North Charleston just recently had the highest eviction rate in the nation. So as a state legislator, and looking at how, even in Somerville, when you look at Somerville, they're talking about development, and everything just seems to be spiraling out of control. What are some of the things that are ideas that you have in trying to manage or stop or slow down a lot of the price increases, or development just spiraling out of control?
So supply and demand is the golden rule of economics, right? If there's demand for it and the supply is lacking, the price goes up, no matter what it is. There's no law that you can pass that will stop the law of economics. Just like if the legislator said gravity is no longer a thing, feel free to fly to the moon, it would make no difference in our lives, because that's insane and they can't do that. But for some reason, they think they can stop the laws of economics. Even in hurricanes and disasters, it's illegal to do it, to raise prices in those kind of situations. Price gouging, so-called, still happens. So economics is economics, just that's the way it is. So how do we lower prices? Well, there's two ways. Fundamentally, if we want housing prices, being a real estate agent, I know this firsthand, to slow down their increase, if we want to do that, and it's either build more housing or have less people move here. And then the statistics are still 51 people a day. Last I looked, it's about 36 net people. If you compare people moving in versus moving out, we're gaining about 35 to 36 people a day in the Tri-County area. We can't build houses fast enough. Now, in about 3 years, they think the number of apartments going up will sort of kind of catch up to that, but not everybody wants to live in an apartment. Most people want to live in a house. But in my experience as a real estate agent, most people want to live in a house with a little bit of a yard and have a little bit of space to themselves. So if the other side of that is people don't want overdevelopment, and I agree. I like living in Goose Creek because it's relatively quiet. I can get to places relatively quickly, and I wouldn't want a 300 plus housing development across the street from my subdivision. I get it, but that's kind of the fundamentals of where we're at.
Right. So question: Do you think impact fees would be a good thing? Because I remember my good friend CJ was talking about impact fees. So do you think? Go ahead.
Oh, so impact fees, we have them now, and in Berkeley County, this was kind of a big deal 2 years ago during the supervisor's race, because Berkeley County hadn't raised impact fees in a long time, which is true. So impact fees are meant to cover the cost of that new building, for things like water connections and infrastructure, police, fire, things like that. An increased burden to local resources. And if they don't go up over time to match inflation, then every other taxpayer has to bear the burden of that. And I wouldn't think that's fair. So Berkeley County's raised it a little bit, but it's a tricky proposition, because it's every time impact fees go up, that gets passed along to the consumer, which raises the price of the house. So if there's a tension there between, do we want cheaper housing? Well, yeah, we want affordable housing. as a legislator, the best thing we can do on the legislative side is give more people money in their, well, not give, allow people to keep more money in their pocket. Because if your income is going to go up by 10% this year and housing prices go up by 6% this year, well, that house is 4% cheaper to you than it would have been last year. I mean, I'm not a math genius, but that's
right.
That's the math that kind of works out. So if we cut the income tax completely, that's 7% more in people's pockets yearly, year after year after year. Hopefully they invest that wisely. If we do things like, there's something called the personal business property tax. Unless somebody owns a business, they've probably never heard of this. South Carolina is the second highest personal business property tax in the country behind West Virginia. So if you own a business and that business owns any equipment, furniture, backhoes, trucks, cash registers, tables, computers, whatever, that the value of those things that your business owns never goes to zero. It will never depreciate to nothing. And it's taxed at something like 12.5 or 13% yearly of its value. It's a tremendous amount of money that pretty much only business owners get hit with. And a lot of people don't know about it until they get the tax bill from the county and they say, you need to pay for all these things. If developers, builders, whoever, let's say you have John Smith Building Company who's building houses. Well, if he has to not pay, if he gets to save 13% a year of the value of his equipment that he's using to build this house, he can charge less to build the house. That house then becomes 12 to 13% cheaper. Again, in theory. Now, is that going to happen every time? Maybe. Maybe they'll be greedy and keep 6% of it. But if they want to be competitive, they're going to have to either drop their price or freeze their prices because that's going to be the same car with everybody else. And this is the problem with incentives, with the big, giant incentives that they give to whoever it is, Volvo, Boeing, Michelin, whoever. I love that businesses are coming here and employing people. That's awesome. That is great. What would be more beneficial rather than giving Volvo $450 million in tax incentives and infrastructure spending, if to offset our incredibly high income tax and business property tax and things like that, corporate taxes and such, rather than just give that big company who's got big lobbyist exemptions, why not just cut those things in general for everybody? So the mom and pop store, the couple that wants to open a restaurant or whatever, pick anything, any sort of mom and pop place, they still have to pay all those taxes, whereas the Volvos, the Boeings, whoever, they don't. I know for a fact, like speaking of the personal business property tax, Michelin rents, it's in Greenville, they're big factories, and they make the big giant tires for like earth movers and those things. Are huge. You see them down the interstate sometimes. There's like 3 tires in the back of an 18-wheeler because they're that big. The machineries that they use to do that, very, very expensive machines, they would have to pay that same business personal property tax if they own those machines every year to the state. The way around that is the department, the state will, in fact, purchase those machines for Michelin and leases them to them rather than Michelin buying those. Because if you go look, I have family members who used to work in these places and friends of the family. On these machines, little bitty plaques that say property of the state of South Carolina, not Michelin, because they rent them. Same thing. And that's a great deal for Michelin. I'm not saying, revoke it, get rid of it, make Michelin pay. I'm saying, let's make that deal for everybody. Let's get rid of the personal business property tax. Clearly, we have enough money every year because we keep having surpluses, and make it easier for mom and pop places. If somebody owns a tire store, they have to pay that business property tax on the 4 lifts and on their jacks and everything else. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. That's my position. So rather than saying we need to punish Michelin or punish Boeing or Volvo or whoever, big companies to get the exemptions, I would argue if we want to bring this full circle, if we want to make housing more affordable, make it easier for mom and pop businesses, which small businesses employ most people in South Carolina, majority of people either work for themselves or work for a small business. If those small businesses pay less in these taxes, these hidden taxes that the big guys aren't paying, they can pay their employees more. Most small business owners I know want to pay their employees more. They would rather take a hit, and that's why this the shutdown was so devastating, was killing them, was they were having to let people go and furlough people that were close to them as family. And they knew the consequences of that for those people. So it hurts their business. It hurt them personally. They don't want to do that. They want to pay their employees well. So that what can the state do? The state can get out of the way and let them do that. So that unless we're going to start subsidizing housing on the state level, which is a bad idea, rent control does not work. We've seen that for 20, 30 years. As an example, New York City and Chicago and big cities, rent control doesn't work. What it turns to is relatively affluent people will go in and find ways to divert the system, find these rent control places and stay there. If you want the best, worst example of that, the show Friends, the whole premise of the show Friends in the 90s, Joey and Monica and all those people, was they lived in these giant, Monica lives in this giant, nice apartment in the middle of Manhattan, which there's no way these people should afford because of rent control, because her grandma used to live there and she pretends her grandma's still alive to do it. And that, it's a joke, it's a comedy, but that's really what happens. So we can't stop economics. The best thing the state can do is get out of people's way, get out of small businesses' way, and let people keep more money in their own pocket, rather than try to force the price of houses down. Because if the state tries to force, or even on the county and city level, if the state forces people, builders, to stop building, or disincentivizes them to build housing by saying you have to build this certain size or this amount or whatever, they're going to build less housing. So that means less people are going to have places to live. If there's less things being built, the price goes up. If the state says you can't charge but this much for this, they're just not going to build as many, and that's not going to solve the problem. We've seen it again. If you look at any big metropolitan area, they've tried all these things and they didn't work. Inflation's a big part of that too. That's not something the state of South Carolina can really do a whole lot about. The Fed's printing billions of dollars at this point monthly, shoving it into the economy, trying to doing whatever they're doing. So inflation's an issue with that as well. That's not something the state can do much about, like I said. But the things we can do is get out of families and small businesses' way to let them keep more money in their pockets.
Right. So now, right. Okay. So as a real estate agent, right, and a lot of people are talking about how the people being unemployed or out of work with the coronavirus, do you potentially see 8, 9, 10 months down the road where we have another housing crisis where people are, foreclosing on homes because they couldn't, run the businesses or anything? Do you foresee, and I know it's kind of like a grim, but is it a reality that sometimes, you think about being in the field you're in, that, it might be a crash later on? And if there is, what do you think we can do to maybe minimize the effects, if that's even possible?
So real estate's a cycle, because, and without getting too deep into the weeds of the Austrian business cycle and everything else, which if someone should, if that word clicks something in their ear, Google Austrian business cycle. If you want to understand the way, whether it's housing or whatever works, the economy works. Thomas Sowell's written a great amount of stuff on this. But eventually, there's going to be, there's ebbs and flows in real estate. Right, I thought 3 months ago when all this stuff kicked off, I was expecting an ebb. I thought it was going to be, prices were going to slow down, price increases, maybe we wouldn't be selling as many. Instead, last week we saw a record number of closings ever. Ever. It was a 5% jump from the most closings previously to that, which was 2 weeks before. And anecdotally, I can tell you, people are looking for houses. If people still have work, if they're still employed, they're taking advantage, because interest rates are 3.5% or less, depending on your credit. So if you're looking to buy a house, let me know. I can help. Shameless plug. But people are still looking to buy a house.
Right.
And what that's done, less people are putting their house in the market right now because of concerns, some justified, about people walking through their house with COVID and spreading the disease. So less people are putting their house in the market because they don't want people in their house. what that's turned into is we've had the lowest amount of inventory on the market that I've ever seen. I got my license back first in 2012. We had 10 to 11,000 listings at any given time. This is before we added to Colleton County. But now with 4+ counties on our system, we have, I think, 4,300 listings total. So it's a third, of what it was 10 years ago. Less than 10 years ago. So that's what's, prices keep going up because not as many people are selling. Eventually, though, if people can't, businesses close like they're saying they're probably going to, and people can't pay their mortgages, and we see a little bit, hopefully not as bad as 2008, a little bit of a correction there. That's part of the cycle. So as far as bringing prices down, that could be a way that it happens. That's what happened in 2008. Was we had so many, first time ever, so many foreclosures happen that it froze and then dropped prices, which was supposed to be impossible. We learned it's not. So it's possible. So what do we do about it? On the state level, again, other than help people make it easier for people to start businesses and keep their businesses, there's not a whole lot that the state can do other than what I would do as an elected official would certainly be out there encouraging and trying to organize as many community organizations as possible to help those people, whether it's churches or nonprofits. That's really where I would help is most efficiently given through those organizations rather than the government. Right. On average, for every dollar of welfare that the government spends on the federal level, 75% of that goes to pay for some sort of bureaucratic nonsense. And only about 25% actually makes it to the family or to the recipient. Flip that on its head for nonprofits, for 501c3s, community organizations. On average, 75% of every dollar given to them goes to the recipients, like goes to the people they're trying to help. 25% goes to overhead. So it's 150% more effective coming through a charity rather than coming through government. So that's making it easier for those organizations to form, which is already fairly easy in South Carolina. But going around and helping those folks is trying to give them as much publicity as possible would be one of the, I think, the most effective ways, rather than, again, use the bludgeon of government to try to fix a problem that government can't fix.
Man, that's wonderful. So yeah, man, Jordan, we at the hour mark, man. This has been a wonderful hour. I appreciate it, man. Very insightful. Like I said, man, CJ said, man, you got to talk to Jordan, man. He's very smart. He got some great ideas. Let people know where they can find you. Just, talk to us about, how we can reach you and just anything. Somebody want to volunteer to help you out your campaign. Just kind of give us the rundown on that.
Yeah, so our website's just jordanpace.com, jordanpace.com. Amazingly, that was available 2 years ago or something, a year and a half whenever I bought it. It was for like $10. So jordanpace.com is a website. There's links on there if you want to volunteer, if you want to help out, if you just want more information. On Facebook, it's I think it's Jordan Scott Pace for House, or Jordan Scott Pace on Facebook. Those are the main two ways to get in touch with me. You can email me at jordanpaceforhouse@gmail.com. We're looking at an interesting fight this November. It's against a first-term Democrat who's has some interesting ideas. She's a big Bernie Sanders fan, big union organizer. We definitely differ on our solutions, our ideas for solutions and how to fix things. In a lot of ways, she's named some significant problems that have gone on, but I think the biggest difference between us is she wants more government. She thinks more government is the way to fix those problems, and I would argue that government is the problem in those situations and has caused those problems. We need to scale that back and empower the community rather than bureaucrats. So it's definitely been an interesting race. I'm hoping it remains civil. I fully intend to be as civil as possible. I mean, I'm a Bible teacher. I'm not a fire and brimstone kind of guy. I like having conversations and dialogue with people. So I hope it remains civil. I pray that it does. And, but it's definitely going to be an interesting divergence of ideas.
Right. Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, maybe one day we can get y'all together and just have a conversation about solutions. And, definitely. Yeah, I think that'll be a good idea. But yes, Jordan, man, appreciate
Thanks
you,
for
man.
having me.
Once again. Oh man, wonderful. And I'm glad you were willing to come, and we can do this,
Anytime.
many more times. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Certainly. Yeah.
Yes,
Any
sir. All right.
like particular issues in the future, I'd love to talk about it with you.
Right. Okay. Yes, sir. All right, Jordan. Well, you take care, man. Appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for coming on.
You too. Have a great weekend.
Yes, sir. You take care. Yes, sir.